Greetings. I'm Vince Dinoto, the director of the Geotech Center, which is the National Science Foundation Center of Excellence located at Jefferson Community and Technical College in Louisville, Kentucky. The purpose of this video is to explain a little bit about the ways that we can use story maps as a communication tool and some of the things that you can do with those story maps. While there's lots of ways to communicate, posters of events, reports with embedded maps, one of the things that a story map gives us the ability to do is have dynamic content, which we'll show in this presentation as part of the story. The link to this story map is up here on the left hand side, and we've also put it on the end slide of this presentation. So we're actually in a story map, and we're going to use that as our communication tool. So this story map is about the battle at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania during the Civil War, and specifically an area that I do research on, which is old water-powered grist mills, and we've located a mill pond that is really not written very much in the history of the battle, and we feel it was an important contributing factor to the events of those days in 1863. So on the left side you can see some discussion about the battle. On the right side we've put an image in here of a cannon. May or may not be an actual cannon from the 1863, but so there's a lot of replica cannons that are on the battlefield. And so we give some basic introductory comments, and as I scroll down the introductory comments you'll see that we changed to a historical map. This map's a very pretty map, printed in color, and you can see areas of vegetation. The red areas are the areas where the Confederate lines were, and the blue areas are the areas where the Union line was. The Union line was much more compact because it was the inner line, so it was much easier to move men from one side of the battlefield to another, which did play a role in the second day. And the Confederate lines were then much longer because they were surrounding those lines of the Union Army. You can see here where the town of Gettysburg is, and the town rectangle sort of here is still there, and you can see where that's located. One of the reasons that we believe Gettysburg was the site of this major engagement in the Civil War is that Gettysburg has like 10 roads that lead into it. And it was kind of interesting because the Confederate Army was moving from the north towards the south, and the Union Army was moving from the south towards the north as they were chasing General Lee's Confederate troops who had already been in the state of Pennsylvania for some time. Now Meade who is the Union general, had the role that he also had to be protecting Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, and other East Coast cities. So he had to make sure he was in a protective position, not just chasing the Confederate Army in Pennsylvania. And we're not going to read the words verbatim, but this map is at the Library of Congress, and we've given you the URL to this map. Here's another historical map, and we've also brought a picture of a player in this battle into the presentation. This is General John Burford, a Union cavalry officer who first engaged the Confederates on the northwest area of the city of Gettysburg, and his men had repeating rifles which gave them a much more rapid firing than the Confederates with muskets. And so the initial battle started in this area, expanded across the whole northern tier. Finally, the Union Army was routed, and they then occupied a position here on what's known as Cemetery Hill and over here on Culps's Hill. So we give you a little bit more of the history of the battle, and some of the units that came in to the battle as are discussed and shown here. And we then move to another map. Let me scroll back for just a second. Notice how Rock Creek looks like almost a straight line here. This is significant for the research that we do. And if we look at this map, we can see more winds and things in the river. And the area that we're interested in is right in this general area here. So that's the area that we're looking at. We'll look at a topographical map in just a moment to show elevations a little bit more, but you can again see the Union Army was sort of this fish hook type appearance with the, if you think of a fish hook, the barb of the fish hook down in this area and the eye of the fish hook that we tied onto our line down in this area. And this was high ground all the way through this area. The Confederates then surrounding the Union high ground. And a more modern map you can see here over on the left hand side as we go through this presentation. This came out of Wikimedia. All the historical maps came from the Library of Congress, and we've given you the URLs to each of these maps. So what we're interested in researching is the water-powered grist mill known as McAllister's Mill that stood on the area of the Gettysburg battlefield. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mill, but for a mill to operate, we have to have a supply of water, and in this case, the water has to drop from a higher elevation to a lower elevation, and then the energy in that water is used to turn a water wheel, which then in turn turns stones, and those stones are used then to grind the grain. This photograph of this mill, McAllister's Mill, was taken sometime after the battle, probably in the 1880s. It was not taken right during the battle time. But to have this type of situation to work properly, we need to have a reserve of water so the mill can keep grinding, and we also have to have an elevational drop. So generally we put a dam on the river to control those effects. And we'll come back to the discussion about General Greene, but there you can see the mill dam. So General Greene of the Union Army states, and you can read this all, but I'm just going to take a piece of it. Our position in the front were covered with a heavy growth of timber, free from undergrowth, with the large ledges of rock projecting above the surface. These rocks and trees offered good cover for marksmen. The surface was very steep on our left, diminishing to a gentle slope on our right. So we're going to explore that comment in just a moment. The 2nd Brigade was on our right, throwing forward at a right angle to conform to the crest of the hill. On the right of his brigade was the 1st Division, Williams Division, his right resting on an impassable mill pond on Rock Creek. And this is the area that's not really discussed very much. This is the only place in the official record of the Civil War we can find this reference of this mill. And this is why the Union line ended where it did, over there where the barb of the fish hook would be, because there was this impassable mill pond. And we find that General Early, a Confederate general, also notes the rocky wooded slopes of Wolf Hill and the pond of McAllister's Mill discouraged a flanking movement in that direction. So instead of striking head on to the Union forces, a flanking movement would mean they would come in at a right angle to the Union forces, which is a much better way of attacking. This is out of a book about Gettysburg and Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill. Well, the general belief has been stated in numerous places that Rock Creek must have been in flood stage. But in reality, the last rain occurred there on June 27th. So if we look at historical meteorological data from Dr. Jacobs, we can determine that most likely Rock Creek was not in flood stage because there hadn't been rain for about 4 days here. And this is a very small creek, and so it would have flown down the creek very rapidly. So this mill pond affects the battle. And how does it affect the battle? The Confederates, to attack that end of the Union line, has to attack up a steep slope. Again, we'll look at that in just a moment. But it also gave the Union Army the ability to move troops from one location to another because they felt they were pretty well defended on the right, so they could move troops to the left. And this is looking off of Little Round Top. If you've read anything about the Civil War, you've probably seen the name Joshua Chamberlain. And Joshua Chamberlain from Maine defends the south end of the Union line. And again, this is a picture off of Little Round Top. The Confederates attacked up this steep hill on the south end of the Union line. Troops were borrowed from the right end, and they were then returned back to the right end of the Union line. On the third day, there was an attack again on the right end of the Union line before the cannonade occurred, before Pickett's charge, and this is just showing some reenactors firing a cannon at the Gettysburg battlefield. And again, we give you a lot more detail of what happened. There is a historical marker located near where we believe the mill was located, but not about its role at the Gettysburg battle, but instead it was an underground railroad station. So the family was a group of abolitionists, and they did harbor slaves that were running away from the southern states, probably in the internal water wheel pit, as noted here on this historical marker, which has fairly recently been established. So taking LiDAR data, we've been able to plot elevation, and you can see the elevations noted here to actually determine the size of the mill pond. These are contour lines, and again, the closer the contour lines are together, the steeper the slope of the content. Notice this notch here, this area here, and we believe that's where the raceway ran to the mill. We believe it had to have two dams to block up the river, or else if you only put the one dam across the main part of the river, the water would have ran around because of some low ground in this general area here, and so that we believe there was a second dam over in this area here. Again, using geospatial technology to understand what was going on. So here is a contour map. So each of these lines represent an elevation change. Yellows are the lower elevations, and oranges and reds are the higher elevations. The closer the lines are together, the steeper the slope. So here is where we believe the mill pond was. This is Rock Creek running in here. Here is Culps's Hill, and the Confederates attacked up this way, which the Union line running across Culps's Hill. Instead of being able to attack up this area, which as you can see as the lines are farther apart, is less steep. Let me zoom in a little bit so I can show that. Again, this is a live map. So here against Culps's Hill, notice this is a much shallower attack, and this area is a much steeper attack, but because of the impassable mill pond, as noted by General Greene, which is here, the Confederates could not gain access to this area. Here is a hillshade, and you can see clearly where Rock Creek is. You can see Culps's Hill. You can see the roads actually that's now part of the National Gettysburg Park that are here, and this is generally the area that we look at the mill pond in, and we've labeled it on the next map, so we've actually shown you where the dams we believe are, where the mill was, the raceway, the island, because this area was higher ground. As you can see that this is at 454 feet, and this was lower ground around it, so we did have this island in the mill pond, which can be seen. And so using geospatial technologies, we've found a lost artifact of history of the Gettysburg battlefield.